Hi, Daddy. It's Emily, and I'm reading chapter 6. I just wanted to say I love you. So, to the official start, it is today I am reading How a Husband Speaks by R.G. Frederick, and I am reading chapter 6, The Fog and the Friendly Fire. And then in bold italics, it says, "You have an enemy, and it's not your wife." Right here. And then below that, before the start of the chapter, there is some italics, and it's a Bible verse, and it says, "Then the Lord God said, quote, 'It is not good that the man should be alone, semicolon. I will make him a helper fit for him. I will make him a helper fit for him,' end quote." Genesis 2:18, and that's right here. Okay, now I'm going to start the actual chapter. Barring amateur paintball competitions, I've never fought in a battle, but I know men who have. Their stories will curl your toes. War is terrifying and disorienting, messy and unclear. So much so that analysts call this disorientation or uncertainty the fog of war. It's a phrase popularized to refer to imprecision inherent to military operations, both tactically and strategically. Strategically, decisions made before or during battle are rarely precise or perfect. They are clouded by unknown variables, unpredictable circumstances, and the inability to control outcomes. Tactically, soldiers experience disorientation of direction, confusion around orders and their execution, fear, doubt, gunfire, weather as in like rain or sun, weather, and other variables which all contribute to the fog of war. And it's a real problem. Fog of war is the leading cause of friendly fire. Military analysts say there is no way to avoid the fog entirely. So, commanders must make do. They trade certainty for speed and precision for agility. They trade certainty for speed and precision for agility. All while depending on the training and judgment of men in the field to just make things work. This is starting to sound a little like marriage, and it is. Now there's a title change, or a font change right here, and it says "The Fog of Communication War," and then that was the title, so it's back to the normal font. You can't predict everything you will face. Mistakes happen, circumstances explode, and your connection erodes. Some marital fog is unavoidable, but handling it poorly isn't. To be clear, marriage is not war. Your marriage is a divine institution graciously given by God so you and your children might flourish, grow, and glorify Him. Your union is a divinely architected cathedral that radiates the majesty of its heavenly designer. Your only task is to step in and occupy God's masterfully crafted cathedral with obedience, joy, and faithfulness. Still, as any married person will tell you, there are times when marriage feels less like a cathedral and more like a battlefield. Like battle, marriage can get messy, uncertain, and imprecise. At times, you will find yourself weighing precision against expedience and agility against accuracy. The trouble is, just as in the fog of war, the fog of communication, war in marriage can lead to friendly fire. In a Christian marriage, this ought not be so. And then there's another title, it's a font change, and it says, "Identify who the enemy isn't," right here. Now back to the normal text, it says, "The first strategic reminder to avoid friendly fire amid the marital fog of war is to know your enemy. Here's an obvious clue. It's not your wife." I'll repeat it one more time for those sitting in the back. Your wife is not the enemy. It must be repeated because, quote, "Your spouse is not your enemy," quote, is one of those truisms that everyone agrees with until they don't. That's how the fog of war works. Things are simple until they're not. Clear and obfuscated. It says clear until obfuscated. I think that is clear until obfuscated. I don't know what that word means, so I may be pronouncing it wrong. Sorry, Daddy. It's obvious that your wife isn't your enemy until the naggy tone flak cannons destroy your recon flights and a "you're just like your father" landmine obliterates your emotional legs beneath the knees. communication battle gets ugly and disorienting. You need crystal clarity in the trenches about who your fellow fighters are and what your shared objective is. When the terrible timing and tone cannon smoke bellows through your bunker, it's too easy to forget. The foundational fact to keep in mind is, even in the heat of communication battle, your wife is designed specifically by God to be your helper, not your hinderer. She's an asset, not a liability, and to a marvelous degree. And then there's another title, it's a font change, and it says, sorely needed, divinely designed, carefully fit. That's right here. And then the start of the normal text is, in the creation account, God made and commissioned Adam to work the garden, but someone, was noticeably missing. So God said, quote, it is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him, end quote. Genesis 2:18. Consider 3 observations from the text. 1, there's a list here, and it has the list right here. Sorry, Lucy just walked in. It's a list right here, and this is on page 51. So number 1, it says, it's not good for man to be alone. Number 2 says, so God made him a helper. And Lucy, get out of my bed. Lucy, hey, hold on one second. Sorry, I'm back. I had to get Lucy off my bed. Number 2 is, so God made him a helper. And number 3, and that helper was fit for man. And then this is back to the regular text at the bottom. As Eve was given to Adam, so was your wife given to you. You needed her, God gave her to you, and she is your fitted helper. Hold on. The pages are stuck. Alright, so the last sentence, so it's easier to understand. You needed her, God gave her to you, and she was your fitted helper. Now, contrast the observations from Genesis 2:18 with how you communicate during wartime. Do you speak to your wife as the God-designed, custom-fit helper that she is? Or do you talk to her like she's an enemy combatant, airdropped behind your defenses to usurp your authority and upend your sovereign self-nation? The key to eschewing the fog in your wartime communication is knowing with full certainty that your wife is your divinely designed, appointed, and fit helper. I'll say it again. Your wife is not your enemy. And then there's another font change. It's another title, and it says, to be sure your marriage does have enemies. It's just that your wife isn't one of them. You are co-commandos fighting towards a common objective and against shared enemies. Let's identify a few of them so you can take them out with surgical precision. And then there's a bolded italic title, and it says, the enemy proper. And then there's text underneath it that says, you have an enemy who would love to see your marriage fail. The devil. He's a prowler, in parentheses, 1 Peter 5:8. A liar, in parentheses, John 8:44. And a tempter, in parentheses, Matthew 4 and 1 Thessalonians 3:5, end parentheses. Be the protector your marriage needs. Do as Peter commends. And then, quote, be sober-minded, be watchful, end quote. And that's 1 Peter 5:8. And as Paul exhorts, quote, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming darts of the evil one, end quote. And that's Ephesians 6:16, end parentheses. The devil is your enemy. Defeat him, not your wife. And then there's another title, it's bold italics, and it says, your flesh. And then the text underneath it says, in Christ, your salvation is sure, and your sanctification is in progress. James writes, quote, what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? End quote, in parentheses, James 4:1, end parentheses. You're still at war with your flesh, and both you and your wife are capable of communication, double agency. Know which side you're both on. Your flesh is your enemy. Mortify it, not your wife. And then there's another title, and it's bold italics, and it says miscommunication, and the text underneath it says, much is said in this book about clarifying communications, but I mention miscommunication here to highlight its enemy status. Solomon writes, quote, an unreliable messenger stumbles into trouble, but a reliable messenger brings healing. And then in parentheses, Proverbs 13:17, and in parentheses, Both you and your wife have the capacity to be unreliable messengers. Work together to increase the reliability of your communication instead of fixating on killing whoever happens to be the messenger. Healing will ensue. Miscommunication is your enemy. Snuff it, not your wife. Then there's another bold italic title that says Habits and Ruts, and the text underneath that says, the final enemies I'll highlight are bad communication habits and unhelpful ruts. Knee-jerk reactions are rarely the best options, and default tones drift toward contempt faster than kindness. Build awareness of habits and ruts that destroy healthy dialogue. Then eradicate them like the vermin they are. Habits and ruts are your enemy. Avoid them like the plague, not your wife. And then there is a title that is a font change, and it says aggressively offensive. And then the text under that says, you need tactics to identify and defend against enemies, but a good offense is invaluable in securing lasting victory. You must advance the line and conquer new territories, or ongoing war is inevitable. Who wants to live in a constant state of conflict? The best way to secure ongoing victory and peace in your communication is to go on the offensive. Here are a few starter objectives to overtake. And then there's another bold italic, and it says, build shared vernacular. And then the text under that says, do you have shared language during conflict? What sorts of words and notions are free to flow in your marriage? What communication culture are you building? How will you process external circumstances, in-laws, the news, or whatever else comes up? And how will you address sin in a productive manner? Much of this probably sounds basic, and it is, but more victories are secured by blocking and tackling than by hurling Hail Marys. This is covered in greater detail in Chapter 11. There's another bold italic, and it says target communication, and the text underneath it says, knowing your shared objective, you each need good targeting systems. Lazily aimed words veer off target and result in friendly fire. Be careful to speak and hear with 3,000-yard accuracy. Couples who talk past one another are either very bad at aiming their words, or they're always moving the targets. More on that in the next chapter. Love your bride by aiming your words carefully, but also lead her by gently helping her aim hers. In the event of friendly fire, this will require thick skin. Still, you're the man for the job. Then there's another bold italic, and it says, delineate sides. And the paragraph below that says, the quickest way we've discovered to clear the fog of war is to clearly and decisively delineate sides. If we're alert, either Selena or I will hit pause and interject, quote, I love you, and I'm for us, end quote. Done genuinely, this interpretation can pluck us up from our opposing sides and place us shoulder to shoulder so we can fight alongside each other once again. In the same spirit, you can remind her that your shared goal in the current dialogue is to gain understanding, seek reconciliation, find resolution, and ultimately experience mutual sanctification. Then you can both breathe deep and continue on. God knows you, and He knows your wife. He knows the various battles you will face. He also knows exactly what you need, so He gave you your exact wife. Remind yourself of that, and be sure she knows this with zero doubt. She is not your enemy. The issue is... Sorry, I read that weird. Remind yourself of that, and be sure she knows this with zero doubt. She is not your enemy. The issue is. Then fight for her and beside her with everything you've got. Okay, that was the end of the chapter. Here is the key takeaway right here, and it says, you and your wife are co-commandos fighting towards a common objective and against shared enemies. And then the mediocrity versus mastery section is right here. Under the mediocrity section, it says hasty to blame and attack wife during conflict, prone to friendly fire through poorly chosen words and deficient targeting, and unwilling or unable to engage the true enemies in the conflict. And then under the mastery section, it says sees wife as his fit helper, not the enemy, bridles the tongue, and soberly discerns and engages the true enemy in each conflict. Whoop, hold on. The pages are stuck. I gotta get to the questions. Okay, so then the application questions right here. So there are 3 of them, and the first one says, what does it mean that your wife is not your enemy? In the space below, write 2 or 3 statements that start with, my wife is my... ... Briefly describe why each statement is true. This is on page 56, by the way. Oftentimes, our first reactions are the most telling. What is your go-to knee-jerk response to your wife during conflict? Why do you think you respond that way? That was the second question. And the third and final question is, how can you and your wife work together to defeat each of the enemies identified in this chapter? Be specific. And then there are 4 different things below that question, and they are titles that are in bold italics. The first one is the enemy proper, your flesh, miscommunication, and habits and ruts. And that is the end of chapter 6, and that chapter ran from page 49 to 58. This is just a side note from Emily, your daughter. I was very amused by this because it reminded me of the Tim Hawkins bit when he talks about going to marriage counseling. And he goes, and we went to marriage counseling, and our counselor said, when you're in the middle of a fight, stop, ask questions. And so we were in the middle of a fight. It was getting hot. It was getting heated. So I stopped my wife and I asked her, honey, why are you being such a psycho right now? I just thought that was amusing. So, because I was reminded of that while reading that. But I also thought about, I've heard this a bunch of times where it's, when you and your wife or your girlfriend or boyfriend fight, you are not fighting each other. You are fighting the problem. And I just think that is basically this whole chapter in summary. But that's just my 2 cents. And I've never been in a relationship or on a date. So, all right. I love you, Daddy, and I hope this helps.